at a later date as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today for our second, talk with Asian American Pacific Islanders rising in the South. And I'm so thankful because I feel like I found a unicorn of a person, but he really isn't. I think he's a representative of so much of what's beautiful and strong about New Orleans and New Orleans East. And, being a Vietnamese American himself, I think there's a lot that I'm just really excited to talk to him about. So we're going to have Luan Vo here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jackie. I think I was exaggerating, but I appreciate the kind words and glad to be here.
So I met Luan because he reached out during, this whole pandemic and was really interested in giving back to the community. And, I learned about his history a little bit with Vayla and how he eventually became a posse, scholar and has done so much with his life. And I feel like sometimes as Asian Americans, we're really afraid to use the word leadership and leader because, we have an idea of what that looks like in our head. Even just as folks of color, we think like leader, we think somebody who has a title or has like certain markers of success. But I think what's really impressive to me about Luan is that he's been able to define that for himself. Like I immediately just like felt that in our conversation. So I kind of want to do some icebreakers first, but we'll dive into some of his journey today, and it's it's such a treat. So if you could describe New Orleans to an alien, Luan, what would like 3 words that you would use that would pop into your head immediately?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So I think if I were to describe New Orleans to an alien, probably would say hand grenade, gumbo, and hospitality. I would say hand grenade because I feel like, it's a good drink, but if you keep drinking it, you loosen up and you start having fun. And that's what New Orleans does to people. Gumbo, because it's a mixed, diverse of people and their, their culture blended in. And that's what I feel New Orleans brings out in people. Yeah. And hospitality, like we're the definition of Southern hospitality.
Yeah, it's so funny. That's like something to drink, something to eat, and then like I think a type of energy. And I think
exactly
parallels with that with our Asian American identity. So what is one place you would take them to eat?
One place? I mean, there's so many good restaurants. Like, I can't choose one, but if it was, one restaurant on top of my mind, I'd probably choose Dong Phuong.
Yeah.
It's you already know like it's famous for a lot of things. You could get any of your Vietnamese cravings, and recently it had the award for the best king cake. So you get both savory and sweet.
Lines out the door for sure.
Exactly.
Great answers. Oh my god, I feel like a pageant meister or something. But moving on, I think we can start diving in. I think, so May is Asian American Pacific Heritage Month, and so much is happening in our country, so much is happening in our world, the public health pandemic and all of these things. And, I think it's more and more important to kind of like be in touch with your roots and who you are.
Right.
It fortifies you in all the work you do and all of your relationships. So what does being Asian American and specifically Vietnamese American mean to you?
So for this question, I feel like I could break it down into multiple answers. So starting off with Vietnamese, I feel like that was my first identity. And when I was young, I thought about thinking about myself as a Vietnamese was the food. We have great food, phở, bún bò Huế, bánh cuốn, and the festival during Tết time, the Lantern Festival, line dancing, and all that. But as I grew older, I felt like I needed to understand more. And I definitely felt proud when I understood how my parents' history coming over to the States. My dad, he left at the age of 17, and he's a sibling out of 12, and he was the only one that risked to come over to the States. And in the process, he almost died from it. And for my mom, she stayed, but she had to quit school to help with the family, with work and stuff. And the communists came and took their property as well. And I felt like their hardship was a big definition of my identity as a Vietnamese. And the second part would be my American identity when I first immigrated over here. And it became more prominent when I became a citizen at the age of 18. So getting closer to that American dream. And I felt like I had a lot more opportunities than I would have had if I stayed in Vietnam. And when you combine these two, I felt sometimes that I had an identity crisis. At the age of 15, when I went back to Vietnam, I felt like my relatives and friends weren't looking at me as Vietnamese enough. And when I came back to the States, talking to my American friends, I wasn't American enough. So I know there's a lot of things that I need to work on and blending it all together. But I am the product of all the hardships that my parents went through to get me here. And plus, it's also nice to be able to talk two different languages. So that's always a plus.
Yeah, I think it's the older you get, the more you realize how much of your language is so important. And I think
exactly.
Like, it's so unfortunate that sometimes, you know, in the process of like assimilating and trying to fit in America, we reject our cultural heritage and we reject our language, or it's not even an outright kind of conscious rejection. It becomes like this isolation from culture. There's a lot of people who don't grow up around folks that look like them or like grow up like and it seems like just in your reflection, you think a lot. I think you're an only child, right?
But I am the only child.
You think a lot about, you know, the hardships of your parents. And I really am curious about that, right? Because it seems like they shared a little bit of their story with you. And that's also rare because, you know, the older generation doesn't always like to talk about a lot of the trauma that they've been through to get here. But how do you feel like your parents' hardship has shaped you as a person? How do you feel like it's kind of shaped your idea of what community is and what, you know, leadership is for you?
So when they are talking to their story to me, when I was younger, I didn't really understand what they meant. You know, I just thought that they just like to talk a lot about their past, just to me, because they don't really talk about it outside to other people. And as I got older, I realized how traumatic it must have been. Like the things that he witnessed, the things that he's done just to get here. I couldn't even imagine doing it myself. So it's all the thing that is kind of hearing it to make it feel real. And whenever they have any adversity, they kind of tackle it with a smile. And no matter how hard it is, they never complain it to me. They might have talked about behind my back in closed doors, but they never showed that they are struggling. And I felt that built my character because there's a lot of things that hit me, you know, obstacles that comes my way, but it's a mindset thing. I felt like they always had the positive mindset to tackle anything that comes their way. And that's what I got out of that. I see their resiliency. You know, they work so hard. They never complain, and they do what is necessary for parents. And that I couldn't thank them enough. I'm just grateful to have such strong, powerful parents to teach me all these values.
Yeah. So I think that's beautifully said. I think a lot of times we see our parents struggle and we don't necessarily get a chance to verbalize or talk about it, but it also like pushes us to do, you know, better or like constantly feel this kind of weight and pressure.
Right.
It doesn't always necessarily mean we do what's best for us, right? We feel pressure to become things that we might not otherwise want to be, or do things where we're like, okay, this is the safe route, this is the better route, this is, you know, we play into the model minority myth where it's like, okay, this is what we'll do, you know, because what a good, you know, good Asian kid does. But can you talk a little bit about how you feel like you found your path through that and developed your sense of like leadership and like, okay, I can really honor my parents while still doing something that feeds my soul, you know?
Right. So I feel like every Asian kid, I'm not going to generalize, but a lot of Asian traditional parents kind of have set things that they want you to do when you grow up. So for my parents, they want me, you know, growing up, they want me to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And so I grew up thinking that that's my route. I have to do that. So when I went to Tulane, I started off as a bio major and realized that that's something I didn't want to do. So I switched to business, and that shocked them. They didn't speak to me for a good bit, but we got over it, especially after I got into, I got a corporate job. I promised them that I'm going to make it work.
Uh-huh.
And the corporate job was great in a sense that I had great benefits, salary, I learned a lot, but it was starting to define who I was, and I was losing myself. So I took that risk without a safety net, which I don't recommend. I feel like everybody should have a plan B, C, D. I just dived into it and just quit and started finding what I'm interested in. And luckily I did. I started a real estate business, investing in properties around Louisiana, so I could help, build houses. And eventually my big idea is to build a community for low income families.
Yeah.
And I recently just became a realtor. So it also helps, people who do not speak the English language, and makes the home buying process easier. It wasn't easy, I feel like I'm still trying to figure out this whole entrepreneurship, but I'm slowly defining my own story and finding myself again. And that's a big part of why I decided to take that risk.
Wow. I feel like you just touched on so many amazing things that we think about, but don't always even talk to with, about our friends, in your 20s,
Right.
30s, how hard it is to really define who you are. And you said something that really resonated with me. You said, I had a safe job and my parents were proud of me, doing corporate work,
Right.
but showing up as myself. And I feel like that's not something as Asian American kids, or Vietnamese kid, you have the space oftentimes to think about, because there are all these, society thinks you're a certain way, your community thinks you're a certain way. And, the goal of Vayla is really to create the sacred space where, you can have these conversations, you do explore, you can fail, if you want to become a rapper, if you want to become a farmer, whatever you want to do. It's like these conversations should be accessible to you in any which way, because it's not just because you're American, because you're a human being, right? This idea of being globally aware of your parents' stories and your own power to define yourself is really beautiful. So I think that's how you exemplify like leadership to me. I think we also talked a little bit about resiliency and your parents, but I'm thinking about your capacity to figure things out as a first generation college graduate. You became a Posse scholar, right?
Right.
And, you graduated Tulane. And what were some of the pivotal moments, from studying abroad? I think you had mentioned you had done before, to, you know, or just even little moments of, wow, I didn't know people interacted like this in this space, that changed and shifted your perception about like all the things that are possible for you.
So there were a few pivotal moments that I could think in my head right now that really shaped who I am and made me comfortable with being uncomfortable. And first of all, like you mentioned, being a Posse scholar. So just for people who don't know what Posse Foundation is back in 1989, Deborah Beale, our founder, had a student where he said, I never would have dropped out of college if I had my Posse. So with that idea, every year, the Posse Foundation selects a few young and talented, diverse students and can go to college together to be a support system. And that, my Posse became lifelong friends. I have lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs, teachers, you can name it. And now we have each other back and be accountable for our own success. And during my college career, I'm naturally an introvert when I'm younger. And because of Posse, I am forced out of that habit. And they were pushing me to do things that I'd never imagined doing. Like I became a finance ambassador at Tulane, a fellow at the Tulane Center of Public Health, student abroad ambassador. So I was doing things that were outside of my comfort zone, but grew into these leadership roles as I learned how to open up myself more. And like you said, the study abroad, definitely recommend it to anybody. It's amazing. I had the best time of my life there, and I always think about when can I travel again. And it's there's things that you learn during study abroad that you will never if you stay home in your hometown. I met so many different cultures and group of people there that changes how I view the world. And when I think about being in New Orleans, we're just so tiny and the world is so big.
Yeah.
It really gives you a better perspective of how things work.
Yeah. I think that's so beautiful. As a native son of New Orleans, I think even though, like many Asian Americans, I think we have the highest ethnic racial data of not being born and native to this country, but you have this very real, American identity. And being a native son of New Orleans East, and even thinking about your favorite places and your favorite things about New Orleans, you're very like raw and vulnerable and honest about it. But I wonder oftentimes, like, how do you feel like, what would you say to a young person who doesn't even feel comfortable going uptown or like, to the lower garden, right? Like, accessibility. So oftentimes, you talk about creating a community center and like helping through language, but so much of it is cultural. So how do you feel like you kind of got over this discomfort of like not knowing and like, pushed through? Feel like, okay, I don't see a lot of people who look like me in these spaces, but it's important that I'm here.
Yeah. So growing up, as an only child, my parents are very protective of me. And I felt like I could never do anything I wanted to. I had to hide to learn how to ride a bike. Like they wouldn't even let my training wheels out until I forced one of my friends to like, hey, teach me. So with that in mind, I felt I was a rebel at a young age. I had to like sneak and do things that my parents wouldn't let me to do. So growing up with that, I knew that if I wanted to be somebody, I had to change how I think about things, and I can't be scared. So it really helps because a lot of my friends after high school, they stayed in very similar colleges. And I decided to go to Tulane, where not a lot of my friends went. And that exposed me to a whole new world because now I have to meet new people, talk to them, and make myself vulnerable because, these people, you don't know if they are really true to their intentions or not. And I had to let my guard down to let these people in. And having these discussion, open conversation like this really helped because we find that there's a lot of things that we see that is different, but when you talk about it, there's a lot of similarity. And that's, I feel like if I were to tell a kid who are afraid to do something, how do you know you're afraid if you never tried? How do you know if you don't like it if you never took the risk? Because you're going to keep wondering. And that happened to me. Like I still do that sometimes. I'm always in my head overthinking about what could happen when it never happened before.
Yeah.
So you got to just take that risk and go for it. And luckily I have a great support system to always push me to go above and beyond.
Do you want to just quickly plug in what your support system is? Give us some pros.
Yeah. I mean, Vayla is one of them for sure. I feel like Vayla is one of the unique spaces in New Orleans East that we don't have much around, but we need.
Yeah.
It's a safe space for me to talk about real issues that I probably wouldn't be able to talk around in my community, especially at home. My parents, I'm very conversational at Vietnamese, but there's certain words that I can't translate back, and it gets me frustrated, and especially about politics. My parents are very conservative, very traditional, so they're locked in. They wouldn't even understand what I'm trying to say when it's my point of view. They would just say their piece and then just get into arguments. So I feel like being at Vayla, being an open space and a safe space to really understand who you are and what you're trying to say, and having someone listen is a big deal. And I always, encourage people to go there because it promotes and nurtures young leaders to be authentically themselves, and is a good soundboard for anyone to come in there and kind of figure out what is their full potential.
Yes.
And we need more of those, because especially now, a lot of kids grow up and kind of conform to what society tells them to do, and when they grow up, they feel like there's an identity crisis within themselves. And I feel like if the conversation is there at the beginning, it would kind of start them thinking about what they really want to do.
Wow, you just touched on so many points that are like so important to our vision of Vayla, and not just Vayla, right? But like being a child of the diaspora and being Asian American, no matter if you're Vietnamese American or Korean American or even like a Black American, like I think your identity is such a deep source of power, but it's so rare that you have a safe space to talk about it without it being too political or you know dangerous. And having a space where young leaders can be themselves authentically is so vital, because it's like you mentioned, you know, your community at home or even your community of friends, right? I think a part of leadership is how we redefine and push the limitations of what community is as we engage in community, right? Like you talked about, I think heavily about honoring your parents, but also really pushing their limitations. This is, you know, I think there's this beautiful saying going around New Orleans, and especially, you know, with our Black brothers and sisters, you know, I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I think for Asian Americans, it's for folks like us who come into leadership positions, you don't come into it because you're like, oh, I can be this one day. It's like you are your ancestors' wildest surprise. You know, your folks want you to be safe. Your folks want you to make good money. Your folks want you to, you know, not rock the boat. You rock every single boat so that you can get more people on the boat. And take them along.
I love that.
Right. So I think that's, you know, you kind of answered my question too. I had a follow-up question on how you feel like we could better support young people. But I think one really big question I have is, you know, if you could give yourself, and I'm not going to disclose how old you are now, but clearly you're done with school, you've opened up your own business, visions and ideas that you're implementing. But if you could give yourself, the kid that, you know, was in Village Celeste as a 17, 18-year-old you could give that kid any piece of advice right now, what would kind of be your pep talk for him, right?
Gotcha. I'll probably just tell him, like, don't overthink, take action. Because I felt like those 4 words really mean a lot, because when I was young, and still to this day sometimes, I overthink everything. Maybe that's the Virgo in me, I don't know, but I'm just like overthink so much, and I always go to the negative side first. And that just pushed my, you know, whatever I'm planning to do, the plans just already vanish, you know, like I want to tell my that whatever you want to do, you can achieve it, and whatever you need to do, just go for it and enjoy the process. Also enjoy the process. That's the big, for myself, I always try to see the end goal and kind of disregard all the little steps and disaster that comes along with it. And that's what is building good character. So don't overthink, take action, and, you know, just go for it.
I feel like that's like a essential Nike commercial, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Billions and billions of dollars. And I think like Asian Americans experience this exceptional invisibility. You know, we're like the quiet minority. We, you know, we cook, we clean, we do all of these things to the fabric of American life and American society, and still oftentimes we aren't seen as Americans, and we don't, you know, you just don't kind of see us, and we're not loud. And I think like it's kind of tough to get loud and be present because we contribute so much, right? And in thinking about that, we also have to think about kind of the state of the country. You know, we are children of immigrants and refugees. So many of us are immigrants and refugees ourselves, right? But we come into this country where white supremacy is rampant. There's in the South in particular, I'm sure you grew up, and, you know, I think you went to McMain.
Right, I did.
And it's a very black and white city. It's a very black and white South. And it's hard not to overthink, right? You see your, you know, black and brown brothers and sisters, you're like, okay, they're a very visible minority. And if you're a visible minority, this is what happens to you.
Exactly.
So how would you encourage folks our age? Let's not even talk about, we can move on later about like how to talk to our parents about Black Lives Matter, right? But how would you encourage folks our age who are really just trying to figure out their identity and their sense of power right now to be better allies to, you know, Black and brown folks? Because I think that's one of the things we touched on when we were talking about being at Tulane and being exposed to different cultures and realizing you can really exist in a silo if you wanted to.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this is a tough question, and it needs to be answered. And a lot of, Asians do not like to talk about it because you don't want to get too much involved. That's the thinking. But how are we going to become better allies if we don't have these difficult conversations?
Yeah.
And for myself, I feel like just within my family and friends group, I need to be more open about these conversations and have these conversations, even when not something it's comfortable to talk about. And it's hard, it's hard. And I sometimes I have a hard time speaking up as well because I'm afraid, like, what if something happens? But I think at this time, you need to be vulnerable and you need to be brave at the same time to talk and speak up, because being a bystander is also part of the issue.
So you had mentioned before that, during the whole Ahmaud Arbery thing, you've done a run and things like that. Do you feel like sustained actions like that kind of speak volumes sometimes when it coincides with conversations? Like, what is it that you encourage? Because I feel like you're somebody who, exemplifies leadership in so many different ways to me, but one way is that I feel like it really aligns with the things you do as well. And you're like an amazing young person. So I'm always like, what would you tell somebody who's like in high school or somebody who's in college to do?
I would tell them to be more aware, because it's easy to get distracted on social media. Unfortunately, we see a lot of these things come up only when it's already too late. And I feel like you have to continue these conversations. I mean, I like a group of friends and we went and did the 2.3 miles run for Ahmaud, but we were continuing the conversation after that because we don't want something like this to happen again. And I feel like, for college kids and high schoolers, they're so wrapped up on what's on social media. It's only a like and a comment, and then what's next? What's the next hype? And I feel like there's not that conscience of this is real, this being affected by a lot of people, and how can we continue that conversation? Because if you don't want that to be a hashtag and like and forget. And I just think that more of those classes to be incorporated into the college and high school curriculum, to really understand what is going on and to be more vocalized. Because talking about those things are pretty touchy, because everyone thinks that every time when we talk about this, it's a race thing, because it is. You need to understand where this is coming from. And it's okay to not understand, but you have to be educated.
Yeah.
To be aware.
Oh my God, you just touched on so many Vayla, I think, like values. I think education is around it. Around this issue is so important, because it's about advocacy. It's about being, from an informed place. I think if you read in any kind of like narratives and media or TV or anything, like you're talking about social media in this country, you breathe in, anti-Blackness. You have, implicit biases about Asian people and Black people on what you see and what's around you. So unless you're actively unlearning and relearning, it's really hard to grow. So as a follow-up, I know personally, like, even as a executive director, when I'm like making hiring practices, when I'm thinking about like equity and power in our community and thinking about how to explain that to my parents, how do I talk to my mom about, why do Black lives matter? And why is that even a conversation we need to have, right? I think like it's challenging in its own way to talk to our own community, but we can't expect folks to come in and talk to us about it. What are kind of your tips in, I guess, talking to your own parents about it, your elders about it, right? I think for Asian Americans in particular of our generation, you're not just the bridge generation when you're being rebellious, but you're also like trying to redefine leadership for your parents as well. You're trying to make them braver. Yeah.
So that is a hard one, and I'm still struggling with it. So if you have tips for me, let me know. But for me, like through Posse, through McMain, through all of my experiences, I'm very comfortable with the Black community. like I have friends, lifelong friends that I'm going to be in their wedding and they're going to be in mine. So coming in from New Orleans East, I feel like a lot of Asian parents, and I'm speaking about mine, they just feel, they watch a lot of news, and in New Orleans, there's a lot of Black crime, unfortunately. And that they take that and associate that all Blacks are bad. So for me, I have to continually talk to them about these things, that this is just because a few people are doing it, you can't generalize the whole population. And one way I have been doing that is inviting my friends, my Black friends, over to my house, like let them have this ring roll night, the buying sale and all of that. Food brings people together. And then my parents are definitely more aware and more understanding now because of all those experiences, because they see that they are my friends, and some of them are family, because I'm the only child. So a lot of my friends are like brother and sisters.
Yeah.
And the more they associate these good things, because like I have so many Black friends are doing amazing things, like being lawyers, being, special ed teachers. They are turning our community into a better place.
Yeah.
And I think when my mom and dad see that, they associate with positive being.
Yeah.
And that's what one way I've been trying to cater that to them and let them understand that, you can't just generalize a few people for the whole population.
I absolutely love that. I feel like it is a struggle, right? You're asking me like, if I have any tips to give it to you. And I think it's always to have the conversation. It's always to come from a compassionate, place of, not attacking, not reactive, but a place of, clearly we see the images being fed to us. We know that community is being hurt, especially in New Orleans East. Vayla's history of working across racial lines, cultural and generational and, religious lines, really to bring folks together and, fight a landfill from being built. So much that applied to this capacity of, sitting in our discomfort and exposing ourselves to things, right? How can you say you can't know Black people if you have a Black friend?
Right, you can't say that. Exactly.
Have one Asian friend. Like, have you broken bread together? Have you, really exposed each other to your own humanity? And I think that takes a level of vulnerability. Sharing food and sharing stories and sharing our experiences like this is one beautiful way of doing it. One thing you said that really struck out to me is that this is a constant thing too. It's not like a one time, like, okay, we had the conversation, don't be racist now, right?
Right.
It's the same thing with like, you can't be, with the whole pandemic, with all of the things that are coming from the sitting president about, Kung flu and like the Chinese being a virus. And, even the Vietnamese American community has come out and said those things are unacceptable. It's like, how do we stand in solidarity with one another across disciplines, across ethnic lines to really push these things? So I think my last question for you before I open it up for Q&A, because I'm sure people have burning questions, because I think you're fascinating. What does solidarity look like for you? You kind of answered some of that questions, but what would you kind of, again, tell somebody, like, how does solidarity look like in New Orleans East?
Gotcha. So a quick definition, I feel like solidarity is a shared responsibility. And right now as an Asian, I need to show my solidarity by challenging and exploiting the ignorance around us. First off, just by educating my family and friends or like strangers that I meet in public to talk about these issues and have these open and difficult conversations. Especially, with the COVID-19, we have a huge spike in Asian racism, but that happened way before. And also into other minorities, the Black and Latino community, they've been dealing with that too. So we can't just ignore that. We're dealing with this. I feel like the best thing is to band together and support each other during this time. Theme for this is just to have open and honest conversations, because a lot of people love to talk about their problems, but never like to listen. And if we are able to open our ears and really listen, we can have ways to come up with better solutions for everyone. But it starts with a conversation. And for me personally, like I told you, I wish that I am more outspoken, and I'm working on it. right? And when I see an issue arises is in public, I need to speak up instead of just walking by and be by that bystander, because now I'm just adding on to the few and causing more of the problem. And like I say, it's a necessity to educate, and that's one way of being a solidarity as an Asian American right
That
now.
is beautiful. I would vote for you, Luan.
Oh my God.
No, that's an amazing definition. And even, being somebody like me who's been in so many different Asian American circles in the Midwest, in the coast, and also in the South, I think like conversations like this in the South are particularly hard to have, right?
Yep.
Particularly hard to have in New Orleans East because, we have a very diverse ethnic makeup in very similar social economic classes, right? We're all struggling with the same kind of issues. We're struggling with crime. We're struggling with trying to make it. And it's hard to see each other as, a support system for one another.
Right.
Like, how do we support each community together? So versus like competition, and it's really about focusing on that and how we can uplift each other. And seeing how strong the Vietnamese American community has been, at Vayla, with our roots and in New Orleans East, like, okay, how do we uplift the next generation of leadership like yourself, build them up to connect with other folks so we can continue to, take shared responsibility.
Right.
Like that needs to be on the t-shirt. Solidarity is shared responsibility. So I think that's a huge, part of the conversation that, we just wanted to get through having, like how amazing leadership can look like without, it doesn't have to be a straight line. You don't have to be a surgeon or a pharmacist or, to be a leader. You don't even have to be a politician. You can be somebody like you who cares about the community and does what you want to do.
Exactly. And there's so many ways that you could support your community. Even just like, for example, buying food. Instead of going Chick-fil-A, go down to your Black-owned or Asian-owned local restaurant down the street. Help them out, especially now at this time. So you don't have to make a huge impact to make an impact. And I think that's a lot of people try to do something drastically huge. You don't really have to. It's the little things that count.
It can feel so overwhelming when you're like, there's such a huge issue. But when it comes down to it, as somebody who's done this work in the community, I'm always like, if you want to make a difference in your world, go home and love your family. Go home and acknowledge the women in your life that background, take care of you in all of these invisible ways, or treat, like, love yourself and know your culture and define your identity as a source of your own power, right? And I think that's what a true leader is like. So I'm going to open up to Q&A right now. Let me see. And I want to know, we're probably going to record this and post it onto our radio station as well in New Orleans East. We'll let you know if it's broadcasted on anytime soon. Somebody wrote, for a place like, Rochelle Kwan wrote, for a place like New Orleans, where the real estate market, especially since Katrina, has been so detrimental for Black communities, how do you feel like you create this belief in solidarity into your work in real estate, not only for the Vietnamese community, but also for the Black communities as well?
So this is a great question, and I'm still working on it too. Right now, I know that Mayor Cantrell and a big group of investors are working on to revitalize the East. When Katrina, it was devastating, and a lot of people do not want to come back. We didn't have a Walmart until almost like 8-9 years later. So that was rough. So that question, it's going to be hard. How can you attract people to come back and also, build up the community as well? So there's, I feel like in the East, there's a fine line. There's a part of the community that that is Asian, and then the other is Black. I feel like there shouldn't be a line at all. So how can we build real estate that accommodates for everyone? And I feel like that's a bigger issue than I have the answer right now. But one of my goals is to be able to discuss that with people who can make things work. And I've been talking to one of my mentors who is planning to revitalize a huge building in in the East around Reed Boulevard. And if we could continue that conversation and just incorporate like what are needed, what do the community need? That's probably like just opening up the floor and let the people talk instead of trying to control every little thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of times the government like to make decisions on their own and not listen to what is happening on the ground.
I love that. I love that, you're a young person. You're like an ideal Vayla young person, I think, because if there was an ideal, and there isn't, but in so many ways you exemplify why there's a need to, as a responsible Asian American, a responsible community member, a responsible Vietnamese American, and entrepreneur, to ask these questions and critically think about how we hold our government accountable
Right.
to the people and not just vice versa, right?
Right.
And it's about this willingness to really be brave and vulnerable again. It's this vulnerability to rock the boat so we can get more people on the boat.
Exactly.
We have another question, and I think this question is also a really good one. You've mentioned the importance of being willing to take action. And I think that's a really amazing quote too. Take action and don't overthink it despite the risk of failure.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your views on what failure is, and how do you cultivate how would you suggest young people cultivate a healthier perspective on what failure is? What is the importance of learning from the big F,
Right. So it's a mindset thing, and I continue to learn this throughout all of my, failures. So instead of calling it failures, I call it opportunities. It's an opportunity for me to learn from it and grow from it. Hopefully I don't make the same mistake. Instead of making it into a negative connotation that, once you fail, that's it. Anyone that is successful, you ask, they have way more failures than their successes. Of course, you don't talk about them. It's all, in the background. So if I were to tell someone that, think of all the opportunity, the journey that you're in, every little failure that you encounter as an opportunity to grow to the person that you will become tomorrow, and just focus on all the things that you're learning. Because I have been rejected a lot of times, and I feel like I'm getting comfortable with being rejected. It's just, okay, move on. What's the next thing? I have to continue and keep moving, because I used to let that rejection and failure stop me from doing what I need to do. But after multiple conversations and mentors teaching me, and also my support system, no one's gonna allow me to fail. They're gonna keep pushing me. But then, so you have to be comfortable with all the things that will happen in your life, and just push forward and think of how this is gonna help me in the future to become a better version of yourself.
I think you've spoken so much to what gifts failure bring. And this, we've kind of been socialized, I think, as first generation kids to often think about we don't have a safety net to fall and fail in or on, but it's
Right.
You always have to remember you have you, and that's the resilience factor, the self-assuredness that no matter what happens, no matter all the things your parents and our parents have been through, it's they've pushed through, they grow through it, right? So it's so important to just be brave enough to know that you will almost certainly fail.
Right.
And when you do, you will probably fail differently the next time, but you'll fail forward, right? So that's the exciting part. We have another question. So what are some of the really important programs you think that Vaylas should continue to build for future leaders? We do consider that as leadership building, and we consider Vayla as it's transformed from a community center to so many different things as a leadership and thought incubator in the East right now, right? We do civic engagement, we do reproductive justice, we do environmental justice, but our first and foremost baseline for all of those programs are education.
Right.
But we would love to hear from you on what you think is important for New Orleans East in building leaders like yourself.
I think you're hitting all the spots that are needed in our community. You're having a space for not just Asian American, but all the minorities in the community to come in, have a conversation, kind of explore themselves with each other. I feel like a lot of, people tend to stick to people that look like them, and you have that comfortability, right?
Yeah.
But with Vayla, you have a space that anyone can come to. And I feel you are hitting all the important issues that's happening in the world, politics, environmental, education. And when you have a group of young, diverse leaders in one setting, magic happens. So I don't think if I have any specific programs that Vayla needs to, because I feel like y'all have a lot going on already.
We do.
So just how to promote that and bring in more people would be, I think, the better question to how you attract people who don't know Vayla or knew Vayla but don't really understand what the mission of Vayla is. How can you attract them into that conversation, that room, and then grow these individuals?
Yeah, I think one thing that you've touched on that's really important for all of us is mentorship. And how, Vayla has touched so many lives over the years. And I think about the most important essence of what we do is everything I knew as a kid. I'm a community kid too, even though I didn't grow up in New Orleans East or New Orleans in particular. I learned in my community with community leaders that everything that I get, you take from the community is given
exactly.
To give back tenfold.
Right.
Take what you need and you give what you can. And I think that's an idea as we continue to develop a leadership pipeline is how do we fortify our community, right? I think it's one thing to strengthen your community, but you can't moneyball your way through a lot of the issues of anti-Asian sentiments, anti-Blackness. You really need to fortify it by building leaders who understand that there will always be tension when you work in solidarity. But that tension is that's what makes a violin play. It's what makes a harp play, right? It's the string being tuned in a certain way so that it holds tension and plays a certain note. So I think in so many ways, solidarity and tension and all of these things that are hard and difficult about this work is what makes it beautiful and worthwhile.
Right.
And that was a really good question from our staff. So that kind of wraps up most of our questions. I think we're ending a little bit early, but I think the last question that we want to wrap things up for is if you could see yourself in 10 years, in the trajectory that you're seeing, you're doing now in your journey to leadership, if we were okay, knock, knock, how are you doing, Luan? It's 2030, there's no pandemic.
Right.
Where do you feel like you would be, and where would you hope the community that is around you is? How would you want to see it flourish?
10 years from now, I hope to be a real estate mogul, so big operations. Of course, I have huge goals, but with all the things that is happening, I really want New Orleans East and just in New Orleans in general to be more revitalized, because we have so many talent here and so many different communities such as Vayla to come and try to unify New Orleans as a place where you feel like you can come here and be welcome. So I feel like a lot of them, even though there's different communities in New Orleans, the one thing I feel that we try to make New Orleans a very diverse and inclusive place.
Yes.
So 10 years from now, I hope that I can be part of that story to help revitalize New Orleans a more connected place. Because sometimes it feels like we're not, but we just need to open up and be vulnerable and understand that we're all in this together. COVID-19 does not discriminate against anyone. So why are we doing it against ourselves?
Especially with data coming out that it's just profoundly affecting, minority populations, right? So the Black population is getting hit so hard with COVID-19. And some data came out yesterday that, limited English speaking folks are not getting the access they need to even get testing or PPE and all of these things. But I love that vision of just a more interconnected world and knowing that it's not just about being comfortable with each other, but really learning from each other. We are going to close out now, but we really if we wanted to connect with you, Juan, and learn more about like your, you know, business, or like how to support you and, you know, continue this conversation, what's the best way to reach you? We can probably send out an email and post it later on, but that's the question.
Yeah. So I could post my information to you, and then you can send it out to the viewers. But you know, on Instagram it's Luan Vo, LUANTVO, and that basically connects to my Facebook as well. And I have a lot of things that, you know, real estate related, finance related tips. Especially I'm targeting towards millennials, but it applies to everyone. I'm really trying to promote, you know, things that will help you financially and try to make the home buying process easier. And along the way, you know, maybe I find a business partner for my investing too, because I'm always trying to help people build generational wealth. Because I want to live, you know, I want to leave behind my legacy. My parents did their job to make me where I am, and I want to make the next generation even better. You know, so I'm all about real estate. I'm all about traveling. So hit me up. Love to talk.
That is one thing I love about Juan, is that, you know, essentially, like, I've only talked to you once or twice before we like kicked this off, and I was like, you know, one thing about leadership and activism is oftentimes you see people talk about dismantling and like tearing things apart, and I get it. Like, there's so many systemic oppression kind of just one on top of each other. Like, it's not even a single issue thing, but it's so important to remember that we're creators and we're healers and we're artists in so many of our own ways, whether you're a doctor, fisherman, farmer, or real estate agent. Like, if we don't create and forge ahead a new pathway for leadership, even if we dismantle these things, we'll be left with nothing. So how do we create alternatives? How do we build generational wealth and not on the backs of other people, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Juan. I really hope we can actually like revisit this again in a month or two.
We will.
Like with different conversations, because this was just such a great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I want to actually meet you in person, grab a drink after this, because I'm sure everybody is cooped in their house and going crazy, because I am.
Yeah, please stay safe. I'm going to put in a plug for Vayla. This week we're kicking off our Vayla farm to families and tables initiatives in New Orleans East. So if you guys have any families that, you know, limited English proficiency or have trouble getting access, send the list to us at contacts@Vayla, and we'll put them on the list to kind of get a produce box every week. So that's really exciting. All right.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was fun. All right, y'all stay safe.
All right. Thanks, Juan.